your childhood trauma or your childhood pain wasn't your fault, but your healing is now your responsibility. And so we need to take ownership of that.
You're listening to the Everyday Legends podcast, the show that is dedicated to helping everyday men build legendary relationships with yourself, your partner, and your world. I'm your host, Mike Campbell, and the aim of this podcast is simple: to help you navigate life with more clarity, more confidence, and purpose-driven action, with plenty of stories, a load of lessons, and some loving straight talk. So let's get started. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Everyday Legends podcast. I am your host, Mike Campbell, and today I am privileged, honoured, and happy to bring you an episode with a fellow New Zealander, a fellow Kiwi, brother of mine, Mr. Matt Brown, also known as my father's barber, and the man and one half of the brains and power and engine and purpose that is She Is Not Your Rehab. Now, Matt is someone who I have seen and observed and witnessed over the last few years with their work in She Is Not Your Rehab, which I'll explain in a moment in the episode we'll dive into. But how I actually first came across Matt was via a mutual friend of ours, a wonderful gentleman and someone who's taken some phenomenal photos for me. You would have seen his photos around, Jawad. And Jay would talk to me about his brother, my father's barber, doing amazing work for men and how we should connect and all that kind of stuff. And since that, I most definitely listened to Jay and followed Matt's work and what he is doing, and I was privileged to get him on the show and have a chat. It was really, really cool. Really, really looking forward to you diving into this. One of the things I didn't share about with Matt and ask him about, but I'll make sure it's in the show notes, is, there's so much that they've been doing. It's so cool, and I absolutely love everything they're doing and what they stand for. And also, a dude, they made a post and reached out to The Rock, and The Rock got involved. It's The Rock. It's so cool. Just a great example of beyond the message, which is powerful, and we'll touch on how when you are in purpose and living with integrity and drive and contribution to something bigger in the community, very fucking cool things can happen. And through Matt and his wife Sarah and their work and their son, they got The Rock on board, and how incredibly cool is that? So, what's the connection to that? Well, I'm going to read you a little bit of Matt's bio and then we'll get into the show. Matt Brown is a New Zealand-born Samoan and an internationally acclaimed barber, hair artist, communicator, husband, and father of three, known for giving great cuts and inspiring great men. Hair artist, dude cut Tupac into the back of someone's head. That's pretty cool. Communicator, right? I love this because of what really comes next in the work that they're doing. He is a survivor of family violence and childhood sexual abuse, and shares his story with the men who frequent his busy Christchurch and Palmerston North barbershops in New Zealand called My Father's Barber, and as a way to foster vulnerability, healing, and connection. Now, he talks about that story in our conversation here today. He has facilitated, and we talk about this, multiple programs inside Christchurch, but also prisons around New Zealand, dealing with youth justice, as well as some of New Zealand's most violent offenders. Pretty remarkable stuff, and he shares one of those stories in this episode. Definitely keep your ears out for that one. Matt has cut everyone from the All Blacks to the Wu-Tang Clan. I mean, come on, how cool is this? But his true calling, he believes, lies in his work to redefine society's view of masculinity and to help the cycle of domestic violence affecting whānau all over New Zealand. For those outside of New Zealand, whānau meaning family. In 2018, Matt and Sarah, his wife, partnered with the Ministry of Social Development as ambassadors for their It's Not Okay campaign around family violence. And together, they co-founded She Is Not Your Rehab and launched the concept in Matt's 2019 TEDx talk. He says the movement is an invitation for men to acknowledge their own childhood trauma and to take responsibility for their healing so that they can transform their pain instead of transmitting it onto those around them. And this is what I absolutely love from the work that they are doing. Obviously, when I speak today, I'm speaking to him and his wife Sarah and their organization. Obviously, I'm just speaking to Matt on this podcast. It's phenomenal work in educating and supporting men and dealing with their shit so that they do not pass that on to others. As he said, transform their pain instead of transmitting it. And this is the work that they're doing, and She Is Not Your Rehab, the concept of which he will expand on. This is the work in which they got the rock on board, which I absolutely love, and also connecting into that Samoan heritage, some of which we'll hear a flavour of New Zealand in here as well. I absolutely loved this conversation with Matt. There's, so much more that we could be talking about. You might have seen one of their t-shirts floating around. People all over the globe are wearing them. The work they're doing is phenomenal. I'm a huge supporter of this. And at the centre of a lot of this conversation, a lot of this work, is relationships. Showing up, doing your work, so that you can be a great partner and not transmit your shit onto your partner. She is not your place for rehabilitation. And this doesn't have to be for someone who's been through a horrible upbringing or someone who has a bunch of shit going on that's super obvious. But the dude who is not communicating, is closed off, could be in greater depth of connection and intimacy with their partner. And so I'm going to use this opportunity right now to let you know and remind you, potentially, that I have a new free webinar coming up. 5 easy steps to being a great partner. For the man who wants more in his relationship and in his life and wants to take ownership of his part in it. And also we're going to figure out what the fuck it is to be a great partner. So if you're listening to this, especially around the time of release, then that is coming September the 9th. Find all the access on my website. Go to the page notes for this episode. How you can access it. It's free. Join me. We're going to dive into it. Some great takeaways. Plenty of opportunity to ask your questions. If you're listening to this after the release date, you'll still be able to find that and access it for free. The recording, we'll make sure that it's available. Because men, your relationship with your partner will be a reflection of your relationship with yourself. Those are things you get to work on, and we are here to support you in that. And hopefully this episode with Matt Brown will also help you in that journey. And so let's now get into the show. Matt Brown, kia ora, and welcome to the Everyday Legends podcast. It's great to have you here.
Thank you for having me, bro. Appreciate it.
A pleasure. I'm very happy we could make the time. You know, we were just briefly discussing off the air. We're both in a lockdown at the moment, and it changes things, right? And I've been sitting there with my wife. You know, like for me, I run an online business mostly, so things are actually pretty much the same. But for some people, they have these totally different realities, right? And I'm sure that's something that we might even get into in our conversation today. But before we expand into some topics, I want to learn a little bit more about you. Some of my audience might be very aware of you, some might not. So I like to start with this question, bro, and you can take that wherever you like. And that is, who is Matt Brown?
First and foremost, I'm my husband. Love my dear wife, married to my beautiful wife, Wahine Sarah. And we have 3 beautiful children together, Oceana, Angelo, and Frida. I would say I'm a barber, but yeah, as opposed to, for me, the barber chair is more than just cutting hair. It's a space where I get to have conversations with men every day. But I was born in Tamaki Makaurau up in Auckland, the North Island of New Zealand. Raised down here in Christchurch, so I will consider myself a Cantabrian. Been down here since I was 3 years old when Dad got out of jail. And so, yeah, a short bit about my childhood. I would say I grew up in a very dysfunctional home. Was a volatile war zone growing up. You know, we lived on edge, you know, tippy-toeing around the Superman of our house, whose outlet was anger and rage. For me, myself, I'm an introvert, so I tended towards music and hip-hop in particular. That was my outlet. But a lot of my other brothers and siblings gravitated towards gang culture, addictions, all different kind of vices. And so, yeah, by the age of 10, we had lived in every woman's refuge home here in Christchurch.
Right.
And that was just the norm for us, you know, watching the abuse. I'm a survivor, of sexual and physical abuse. But I don't, I don't remain victim to that. I now speak about that openly to whoever wants to listen, especially in the barbershop with men who have resonated with pain and shame. And I'm someone that, who am I to do this work with men, having these brave, courageous conversations if I can't do this with myself? And so I believe being vulnerable within myself and with my story and owning my story gives permission for other people to own their stories. So that's a little bit about me.
There's a little bit about you. Whew, man, there's some potentially a lot of depth in all of that, and I'd love to explore a lot of it. Thank you for sharing that. So one of the things I want to dive into there, you use the word like volatile, right? What you grew up in, and that was just kind of the norm. Can you kind of take us into that a little bit? Because, one of the things I find in my own work and like with my own life is like we've all been through shit and we've all got shit, but it can be very easy to kind of dismiss and diminish my own because someone else has kind of got it worse. Right. And so that can be really hard because then we kind of can't really navigate our own stuff. So volatile could be anything. You spoke about abuse and surviving some stuff there. Can you take us through to give us a bit of an idea? Because I want to kind of look at like, well, then how you've got to this point and what that point is as well. So we'll get into that stuff later.
Sure. Volatile. Well, for me, the best way I would describe my upbringing would be in one word: unsafe. I've shared this often, but unsafe. It was unsafe to have an opinion. It was unsafe to share my thoughts. It was unsafe to speak. It was just unsafe being me, Matt Brown. And obviously, putting stories together, even having an opinion where you talk back or say something back to your parents and they disagreed with it. I remember one incident, I said something to my father. It was just like a little, I didn't agree with how he was treating my little brother, and he literally got up, grabbed my head and threw it into the wall. And from that resulted in a bleeding nose. Just from speaking up. Another incident, I cooked my old man some food. He didn't like the taste of it, and so he grabbed a whole pot and tipped it on top of me. That's what I mean by volatile. Our house was also we had an open home. My parents had, my mom had a massive heart. She helped whoever, she took in people from homeless people to people coming out of prison to people who were just struggling with their mental health or financial state. My mum will take in anyone. But this ended up, opening us up to people who had hidden agendas, hidden motives, which resulted in a lot of us siblings getting abused. And so when I say volatile, I mean to the core volatile home. My upbringing, it was a volatile war zone.
And that in the word that you said sounds like incredibly and frighteningly unsafe.
Yeah, it was so unsafe, but it was so normal for us. Like when we watched the infamous movie Once We're Warriors, that came out when I was 10 years old, and I remember sitting there with my siblings in the lounge, and we laughed through the entire film because we would compare, Beth, the mother on this movie, who was getting abused from her husband, who was an alcoholic and couldn't, regulate his emotions, and he would beat the shit out of her. We would laugh while he would give her a hiding because we would compare the hidings to our mothers. Like it was nothing in comparison. We would go to church with my mum, bruised face, wearing her big glasses inside this building, and yet no one said or did anything in our world. And the police, I had to lie to friends going to school. School was like a 15-minute walk, and I would obviously gather with my friends. We all lived on the same street, and we would walk to school together. And I had to lie eventually saying, one of my cousins is in the police force, as to why the police were, that everyone always see police cars outside our house, just because I was just ashamed of it.
Yeah,
but
so you flipped it around to that's kind of where they're hanging out.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. As opposed to needing to come.
Yeah.
And so, you said like it was unsafe, but it was the norm. So do you think at the time you had a connection to the fact that it was unsafe?
No, not until you start talking to people at school.
Yeah.
And, and I mean, a lot of my friends growing up now, we would talk about our hidings and the abuse that was happening to us, but we would just laugh about it, and almost like we would compare who had the worst hidings.
Yeah.
And then we would just laugh about it, brush it off. But then when you're at school, and I remember sitting in my English class, and kids were talking about their beautiful holidays or their parents taking them to different places. I was just like, I had never experienced that, and I was just like, man, is my life, is that my childhood, like, are we actually getting abused at home? That's when I started asking the question. It wasn't until high school where I realized that we were getting abused.
Yeah, I was going to say, so about high school, and we, I'm getting there's a few siblings. Where do you fit in the row of siblings?
Out of all 9 siblings, I'm number 6. But out of I've got 4 full brothers. I've got four brothers. These 5 of us boys, and then my half siblings. But out of the 5 boys, same mum and dad, I'm number 3. I'm the middle child.
Right. And so you then got to high school and started to ask these questions. Were your brothers?
I assume so. I mean, we were all.
But you guys didn't talk about it?
No, not really. Not really. It was just normal for us.
Yeah. And then, how old are you now? I can't remember what year Once Warriors came out to try and work that out.
I'm 35 now, so what? There would have been, How old? What year would that be? I can't remember.
We don't need that, math. It's all good. But you're 35 now, right? So, and now I know some of the work that you're doing, and I really want to explore that and make sense of it and celebrate it really for the listeners as well. But I'm really keen to know you're doing some phenomenal work. Let's just call it very simply at the moment, like in the world of men and domestic violence and abuse, and I think in the family and the community. So how do you go from that kid who's just starting to figure out that shit, maybe my life, even though it's normal for me, isn't that normal, and there's maybe some abuse here, to let's just go to being a barber and starting to have some different conversations?
Yeah, well, I mean, I left home at 15 because I was suicidal.
Right.
So I reached out for help. A social worker came and grabbed me and put me into this boys' home, and that was kind of the beginning of my healing journey, I would say, where I started to do the work and ask the hard questions and have conversations with men who had experienced similar things, to what I'd experienced. And it was from there at this house where I found my passion in barbering. Because, growing up in Christchurch, there weren't many people that looked like you that were successful. Everyone. I mean, Christchurch is predominantly white. And so, growing up, my parents would always compare you to the All Blacks. Look how.
So both your parents are Samoan, yeah.
Both of them Samoan.
Yeah.
They would always compare us. John Olomu's doing this, Michael Jones, the great All Blacks. And for me, I was never really athletic, or sport never really resonated with me. I was always more the creative kid.
Yeah.
And so that's where my love for hip hop. I found my love in hip hop was because these guys on the other side of the world were on these video clips, but they were talking about their struggles and pain. But yeah, they were successful about it, and that resonated with me. Not so much about, the girls and the
content.
Not the content, but it was just people talking about their real issues. And that's what I loved about Tupac and Biggie. And so, diving into Black culture, I loved barbering. Hairdressing was always a thing here in New Zealand. Barbering's always been around, but my generation, there weren't many barbers. Barbering kind of fell off the wheel. There was still like the old fellas who were clever and business savvy, where they turned their barber shops into hair salons, but was still barbering. And so when I found barbering through hip hop, I gravitated towards that, and I just loved the culture where men were just there to talk. They were there talking, and so I decided to open up a little spot in my home. And that was in Aranui, and so all my boys and friends and kids in the neighborhood started coming, and that's where the barbershop kind of grew from there. And these conversations, and I soon realized, like, guys were coming into my little shed in the hood in Aranui who didn't look like me, men wearing suits, men in uniforms. And I was like, and the more I talked to these men, and the more I realized, we're all alike. We're more alike than we are different. And so began my journey of self-discovery, learning from dads or men who had gone out of prison or left gangs, and men who were successful and wealthy. I took all that information, and I was just like a big sponge, really. Just soaked it all in and did the work within myself.
Nice. So it sounds like as you started this journey of barbering and the creative outlet, right, by the sound of it, as well as that kind of little bit of entrepreneurial element and of some kind of like being of service to the community, right, like bringing people together, there was like it was almost running in parallel. There was something happening with the men beyond maybe getting barbering, some conversations at the same time. Their growth and experience was also then impacting on yours, which was then obviously getting feedback into that. So does it really feel like that kind of grew as you grew and became more aware,
Yeah,
it exploded?
It's been such an organic, authentic journey, this the growing of our kaupapa, our business, this movement that we've created. In my little garden tin shed where I started, I was like 3 months booked out. To get an appointment with me was 3 months. And so I then started, my best friend lived in Rarotonga, and we would talk every night. And she started asking me questions and started challenging me, what do you want to do with this? And I said, I don't know. And she obviously she used to work for a marketing agency, a non-profit agency, helping, poverty, fighting human trafficking, but she was living in Rarotonga for a year.
Right.
And so I told her, I wanted to grow this. And so she was looking to coming back to New Zealand. And so I asked her if she could come be my business partner. She came and became my business partner. We were best friends, 4 years, had clear boundaries. And then I thought the best business investment will be asking this woman to marry me. Nah. It didn't actually go like that, but yeah, we were best friends for 4 years, and I fell in love with this woman. But obviously we've done the journey of, she knew all my story. I knew her story, and yeah, it just organically grew from that. And so Sarah, who is my wife, who does this work with me alongside me, yeah, it's where the business and the kaupapa, the movement is today, is because I do it with someone that I love, and we're both passionate about this. So
beautiful. So I want to explore that in a second, but something I'm interested in, there might not be an answer for this, but you said like you were in, like Aranui, which perhaps can you give a bit of broader context really quickly for some of the listeners who might not maybe have that?
Aranui will be like, it's the east side of Christchurch University. It's the hood. If anything, I mean, I can't say it's the same, but I would liken it to, it's the South Auckland of Christchurch.
Yeah.
And then, as you said, the hood, yeah, predominantly Maori Pacific.
And then all of a sudden, as you said, some men started turning up who didn't look like you. So they're white, and you said like suits and maybe successful. What do you think was pulling them in at that point? Was it that there was something else happening beyond the barbering, or was it the barbering?
I think it was the conversation.
Yeah.
A lot of, I mean, when I got into, I mean, obviously I blew up on social media from creating a portrait of Tupac on someone's head. And so that kind of blew up my Instagram and Facebook, and no one was really putting up hair art like that.
Yeah.
And so, but then that was more the invitation for people, I didn't really do much hair art. I was more doing, standard haircuts, fades and all that, but there was an invitation for people to come to my little shed.
Yeah.
And so when people came to the shed, I was having these conversations, and all the content I was putting up on social media was about mental health and my own journey of struggling through abuse and domestic violence and, being sexually abused. And so when people were reading this, then they were sending in their partners, women were reading this and they were sending in their boyfriends, their dads were coming in. And often I would ask them, well, how did you hear about me? And they said, oh, my daughter or my wife told me to come see you. And I would always, be cheeky back saying, oh yeah, I'm a cheap therapist.
Yeah, but then, there's this word that's coming through here, which you spoke about earlier, which is, your childhood didn't feel safe. And so what I'm sensing there is like these men came in and all of a sudden there was a sense of safety in the barber's chair.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And what I'm also sensing is, as you said, part of your story with Sarah, your friend at one point and then business partner and now wife, you were really exploring the growth of the business and your own healing journey. So is it safe to assume that you had found a place of safety at this point?
Yes, I found I had never, I'd never been, I had never felt safe my entire life until I met Sarah. So she became my sounding board, a place where I could just not dump stuff, but where I could just release and talk about issues in myself that I had hidden for so long. I had suppressed for so long. And it wasn't that I had to, it was more she's seen that. She's seen that I carried so much pain and trauma, and I'd never had an opportunity to talk about. I've been talking about, you know, being abused, sexually abused, since I was 15, publicly, you know, before it was cool to talk about trauma and all that stuff. But for Sarah, it was like she's seen deeper stuff. She's seen stuff that no one else had seen, and without even, she was just gifted in there. And I didn't have to say it, but she could just see it. And she had this empathy about her. She was so empathetic that I was just drawn to her. Like, who was this woman? And she became a safe place for me just to talk. She was my therapist, my helper, but she was my friend. You know, she was my barber. She was my friend.
And then, you know, I think that feels like a pretty solid place to transition into what sounds like a big part of the next part of that story, which is, you know, you now have this beautiful movement and organization that has a lot around it and behind it at the moment that is called She Is Not Your Rehab. And so can you take us into that? What is it? How has it come about? And also, I think, like, how you would differentiate what you just said. You know, she became my sounding board and my safe place versus like your place for rehabilitation.
Yeah. So the kaupapa She Is Not Your Rehab came about was from obviously my upbringing, my lived experience of witnessing my beloved mother go through, you know, violence, experience horrific abuse from the man she loved. You know, and I remember vividly always asking her, why are you taking him back? Why do we keep going back? You know, he's going to kill you one day. And my mom genuinely believed, and her answer and response was always the same: I believe I can help him. I believe if I love him, if I forgive him, if I do this just once more, if I do this better, maybe he will change. She really, really believed that.
So was she taking like a lot of that on herself?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. And you know, obviously that then we took all that on, you know, we witnessed and we were the bear of that. And so rehab, She Is Not Your Rehab came from me witnessing that, witnessing my mother be a commit her life to being a rehabilitation for a man who never chose to do the work, who never wanted to do the work. And I also credit my wife. The kaupapa comes from my wife, because here is a woman whom, you know, my mom's the first experience I ever had of a woman. And so I assume that all women have this capacity and the strength to just put up with our bullshit. And then I met my wife, who was just so boundaried, and she's like, hell no, this ain't that, you ain't doing this here. Like, you get your ass into some help. She'll ask, you know, go see a therapist, go see a counselor with your shit. But I'm not doing this. I can support you, I can cheer you on, I can walk alongside you, but I'm not here to do the work for you. And so these two strong mana wahine put together gave us this beautiful gift, this beautiful tonga that is She Is Not Your Rehab. And it's for us, it's our call and our invitation to men. You know, your childhood trauma or your childhood pain wasn't your fault, but your healing is now your responsibility. And so we need to take ownership of that. And so it's our invitation for men to do the work. And we know, you know, we get stuck all the time, you know, he is not your rehab too. We know that, but this is our lane of domestic violence. You know, one in every 3 women in their lifetime will have experienced violence from someone that they know. And so And yes, I know boys do experience that too. This is why I want to work with men, and our whole kaupapa is people are so quick to shame men who commit violence or perpetuate violence. But the truth is, a lot of these men were victims themselves first, you know? And so violence begets violence, hurt people. How do we stop that? We have to heal people who are hurting people. And this comes from me, you know, countless times in my childhood, visiting my father behind the wire, visiting him in prison, hoping that when he would come out, he would change. But back then, there was no real help, holistic help for him. The system didn't help him. You know, he got out and he went back to his same behavior. And so, which is why we have started this movement and now written a book, because we want to give people a different window to life, that it is possible to change that narrative. It is possible to be the father and the dad that you've always dreamed of, that you've always wanted for yourself. And my story is, you know, proof of that. It is possible.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you, Matt. Oh man, so much in there. And you know, one of the things as well that popped up, you said, you know, like violence begets violence, and shame begets more shame, right? And I find, like, you know, I see this in the work that I do. Again, like I'm not necessarily working with men who are, you know, perhaps coming from a place of like that such an intense childhood of, you know, as you said, volatile abuse and so on, but they have some, if we use the term very loosely, trauma, something that was fucking challenging for them in the realm of their life. And some shame can often sit at the base of that, right? And when we don't have the tools, we often continue to shame at ourselves, or we fear shame or judgment from others, and it kind of spins on itself, right? And certainly if it does come from others, more shame, some action that you do, be it violence or something different, but still not that effective.
Yeah,
it tends to put us into a corner. You know, I always think about, and perhaps this is something that we can discuss, you know, the idea of there's a little boy inside there, right? And if a little boy is told off and shamed and made out to be wrong, he'll probably do two things. One, he'll fight back and say, fuck you, and stamp his feet, you know, and kind of fight in some sense, or he'll flee and run away and withdraw and hide. And either of those doesn't really tend to bring, certainly if it's me, the adult out to respond and act like with maturity.
Definitely.
So, you know, when it comes to now this work, and even before that, and obviously still sitting with a gentleman who's in the chair and there's a conversation to be had, how do you start to approach and discuss some of these things that are heavy on his heart and, you know, on his identity a lot of the time?
Yeah, beautiful, bro, what you just said. You know, just going a bit back to your previous sentence about people getting shamed and kids, you know, fleeing or reacting. Those are definitely the two options. You know, you're either going to fight back to your parents who are, you know, telling you off or humiliating you or shaming you, or you're going to, you know, resent to a world where you then take it out on yourself. And then that's where the shame is. Shame is not, I did something wrong. Shame is, I am wrong. You know, I'm a horrible person. I'm horrible. But I didn't. Guilt is, I did something horrible. Shame is, I am horrible. And so for children, who are we going to attack more? We're going to attack the person that we love the most, which is our parents, or we're going to attack ourselves. We would rather attack ourselves. And then that shame just sits there right until we're adults. And when we're talking about trauma, you know, the best definition that I've ever come across is the one of a wise guru called Gaba Mate, which I call my dad, who says, you know, trauma isn't what happens to you. Trauma isn't what happens to you, but what happens inside of you as a result of what happened to you, And, you know, this trauma can then manifest in countless ways, like addiction or self-medication, shame, and violence. And so when facing someone who is traumatized, in my experience, you know, there are various factors that can actually make a difference. And one of the most important ones that I've encountered that has worked miracles in my life is empathy. Empathy, empathy has made a difference in my life and in the lives of people I've had the privilege of knowing and walked alongside, especially men in the barber chair, guys who don't look like me, who come from all different walks of life. Someone with empathy knows how to listen, to hear, how to see through all the facades and the masks and the pain and be with you without judgment. It seems simple, but yet it's so overlooked. But I truly believe it's transformative. And this is, for me, this is the ability to understand and listen without a rolled out recipe to-do list.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the challenges, I find this as well in my work. I mean, I'm such a fanboy of what you do, but also, I'm on that too. I believe so powerfully in the importance of men talking beneath the surface about the shit that matters. But one of the things I've often seen in a lot of men, one, we're challenged to start and have the conversation. And as you said, there is so much power in someone leading that because it gives permission. But then we often get stuck in okay, so let's say, Matt, you're struggling and you come and talk to me. I'm ready and willing to help. Every guy has this loyalty to his mates. We're like, oh, help him out. Hey, bro, I'm struggling. Can I talk to you? And then we get stuck with this, fuck, well, now what do I do? Matt's just unloaded some heavy shit on me. And we almost go into this automatic, now I need to try and fix his problems. Like, I don't know how to give advice. I don't know how to give advice to that. I don't know how to hold all of that stuff, right?
Yeah, we start feeling bad. It's like, it's not even about you, but now you're feeling bad because you can't do anything.
Exactly, right. And so, often there's, I see it, and you see it, right? You see the little boy, you see the dude behind the mask, behind the eyes, behind the words and the facade, who wants to connect and be real and be seen, but there's often these big blocks in the way, right? So, you've obviously gone, well, look, empathy is it. So can you break that down for us a little bit then, for the guys that are listening? One, who might need to start having these conversations, but two, who might end up in these places where they've got a mate, a bro, someone who might just need to sit and talk and get some shit off their chest.
Well, I think when people are just trying to survive, like right now, we've got this pandemic, people are trying to survive. It's difficult to even consider transformation. Think about that in our own lives. When your back is against the wall, and you felt you're at rock bottom with no options, you aren't thinking about transformation, but survival. So childhood trauma with mixed up with economic pressures, class systems, prejudice and systemic racism, hard relationships, all play a part as an adult trying to navigate through their trauma. I once asked a group of people in one of our men's groups that we hold at the barbershop, and I see, how do they overcome their addictions or their use of violence and anger towards their partner? And they see a major breakthrough for them was when someone showed them empathy. And so the advice I would give, these guys will say, someone talked to me like a human being. Someone saw me. Someone heard me. Empathy gives people the opportunity to have a different window to life. And so how can you actually do that? How can you give that? How can you show someone a different window to life in your conversations with your friends and the people that you're working with, and I think a lot of people don't know how to hold space properly. We need to start learning how to hold space, and holding space actually requires us to be silent sometimes. A lot of the times just being silent and listening and letting people feel it, because this stuff is there. The pain is there, the violence, the anger, the feeling inadequate, the shame, it's there. It's now just coming to the surface. Let people feel it. Acknowledge it. I think acknowledging people is one of the most important things. Saying I see you, and then having to reparent, retrain, reteach, reinterpret that experience, because children are awesome recorders but terrible interpreters. And so a lot of the times I have to reinterpret that experience for this man who's sitting in my chair, but reinterpret, he may say, oh, my dad was never there. He wasn't present. He never came to my rugby games. So fuck him. And then I asked the question, what was happening in dad's world then? Do you know? And I ask these questions because I've had to do this with myself in my healing journey. You know, people ask me all the time, you know, how are you still in a relationship with the man who abused your mum and abused? I said, because I've done the work. I've had to humanize my childhood monster so I can forgive him. And only when I did that, and I realized that my dad had a lot of his own shit and his trauma that he had experienced, but never had the adequate tools and the right insight to heal and do better. Like, I can't be angry at that. I don't condone what he did, not for 1 second, but I forgive him because it releases me to be a better human, to be the better father, so I don't transmit that shame, pain, and trauma onto my kids.
Yeah, beautiful. And, you know, that, I mean, in a word for me is such maturity. And also what I'm getting in there too is like, there's this importance to, you know, before I try and reframe it, right, and reinterpret it, I've also got to connect to what was my experience, right? Because I need to be able to honor that. You know, you mentioned this term reparent, right? And I think what it really speaks to for us is, how can you start to figure out, first of all, like, what do you need, right? And in a word for you, I'm getting something like safety and maybe some other stuff that comes from it. And how can I really start to create that in my life for myself? Because maybe, you know, like in your situation, but in anyone's situation, my dad or whomever can't necessarily give that yet. Maybe they're not even around anymore. So how can I really take responsibility for that and then get to that reinterpretation stage, which can be so powerful, right? Because it releases the charge. And you know, what I'm sensing in that is, as you say, people ask me, how can you have forgiveness and have a relationship? Well, if you stay there, there's almost this power, right? It energizes us, but it's that anger, that shame energy. And shit, if you want to be an effective person, father, you know, husband, barber, it's probably not going to come from that space, right?
No. And it's hard, but, you know, it's easier to do this for other people, to show people, other people empathy. The hardest people to show empathy towards is yourself.
Yeah.
And so that's who we have to start. When you can do it with yourself, and I've always said this, who am I to do this work with men if I can't do this with myself? You have to do it with yourself, you know? And so...
Yeah, and I think that starts with having that compassion, right? And, you know, you spoke before about like holding space and what does that look like? And the thing that really popped up for me when you said that was, and it's something that I've had to really, you know, work through myself and certainly in the men that I work with is, you know, it will be hard for me to hold space for you. And because with that kind of sharing is coming your emotions, right? If I haven't been able to sit in the space of my own emotions, then it is going to be challenging for me to do that. Because you start sharing about all of your, like, holy shit, you know, volatile, traumatic shit. And all of a sudden, like we said before, it might become about me and my inability to sit with that versus Matt needs me present right now. And there's no fixing or anything in that, right? And then what I connected to as well, you said it a few times and it took me back to your story with your partner. She saw you, right? And what I was getting in that as well was, and correct me if I'm off, she saw you. You shared and you spoke about your story, but she didn't just see the trauma and the story. She saw you, Matt Brown, beyond the story.
Yes.
Is that accurate?
Accurate.
Yeah.
100%.
And can you, if you can remember it, what was that feeling?
Well, at first, you feel exposed because you've hidden behind these walls and you've built your own facade for so long. For me, this was my survival. You know, this was survive.
Yeah.
And it was simple as it was as simple as her asking me a question: "Why do you lie?" And I was like, and you know, how else do you respond to "Why do you lie"? You answer with a lie. I don't lie.
I mean, that is a simple line that cuts straight through.
It's what we call an empowering question.
Yeah.
An empowering question has the ability to change your world, to flip your world upside down. And that's what that question did to me. Why do you lie? I lied. What came next was, I don't lie. It's like, what are you on about? And she just listed things like,
it's like the shield. I'm getting this vision, like you're wearing your armor and you've also got the shield. I was like, pang, get away, deflect.
Yeah. And it's only, I want to see you. And so, you know, take off the armor and to get down to this human. And I was like, fine, you actually love me for me. You know that I lie. You know that I'm hiding and all this stuff, but you choose to still love me. He chooses to still be my friend. And that was transformative. And that's the power of empathy. It has the power to transform trauma.
Yeah. And that's the safety, right? Because empathy is so, shame is so terrified, and that empathy provides safety, right? So I can start to take the layers off and
so empathy does. It makes you think, oh, maybe I'm not such a bad person. Maybe I'm not a shithead, you know? And then you start seeing yourself in a different light. You start seeing a different window to life.
Yeah. And what I'm getting there as well, you spoke about, you know, like the holding space, right? Like staying.
Yeah.
You know, like I see you and I stay. That's safety. That's integrity. That's dependability, right? I can lean on that. I can count on that. Yeah. And of course, that expands into things like now you're doing this with your work, coming back, you know, sitting in my chair, and obviously what you guys are doing with She Is Your Rehab. So I want to ask you, and I want to explore that a little bit more, but I'm interested to know, you know, like there might be men listening to this going, okay, well, I didn't have an upbringing where I had that kind of volatile, you know, childhood and that's like intense abuse and all that. And maybe I don't have intense anger and rage and shit that I, you know, explode. So how would you kind of speak to that guy in terms of the importance still of potentially, like, let's just say very simply, dealing with your shit?
I would say go buy my book and read it. Nah, that's a short answer. Look, all of us have our shit. All of us have our stuff that we're working at, you know. It's not I just like the whole trauma Olympics, or, you know, I've gone through more than you. Like, this is not that. This is how can we be better? You know, can I be better? Can I be a better man today than I was yesterday? Can I be a better father today? You know, and so it's just, you know, I've talked to guys who are amazing, beautiful men who, and this is what I wanted to show in the book, was all of us men are not just assholes. We're not all bloody dickheads and useless, hopeless, you know, losers. Like, there are so many beautiful men out there who are actually showing up every day and getting the shit done, working their asses off to heal, to be better. Yeah, I would say it's do what you need to do to do the work. Whatever that is, everyone's fighting their own battle in the arena, you know, and we need to not listen to people in cheap seats, or as Brene Brown says it, and the box seats, the seasonal ticket holders. Like, the most important section to listen to in your own arena, whatever battle you're fighting with, is the support section. And the two most important seats in that support section are compassion and empathy. And if you have no one sitting in there, you know, I'm lucky I have my wife. I'm blessed beyond this world that I have my wife and sitting in my support section. Someone that's gonna, you know, my wife hasn't experienced my kind of trauma. She's got her own trauma. She hasn't experienced my kind of trauma, but you know, when I lost my mum in December, you know, that was one of the hardest times I've ever experienced in my life. The grief and the powerlessness that I experienced all resurfaced, you know, of my childhood. And my wife didn't have, you know, a magic pill for me to take this grief away, but she just sat with me. I'm in this with you, you know. I felt like a hopeless father. I wasn't present with my kids. My head was in the clouds, but she just sat with me and just, we're going to ride this out together. And so when you have that person in your support section, that's the voice you should be listening to. And if you don't have anyone, which a lot of people don't, you have to show up in that support section yourself. Sit in the seats of compassion and empathy.
Yeah. And, you know, I love that, you know, and I can certainly empathize and sit in that position as well, you know, experiencing my mum passing away, coming up 10 years ago now. And, you know, everyone's experience of grief and, you know, shitty experiences are different, right? But one of the things that I went through myself, and I see a lot in men in situations like that, especially around like grief, maybe, and deaths in the family, is like, I need to be strong and have it together for everyone.
Yeah.
And what I find in that is, like, that's really appropriate sometimes. But then there also might be times where we're starting to dishonor what is very real for us, which is like to feel and experience, right? And to let some shit out or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Yeah. So thank you for sharing that. So now I know some of the work that you do is, in prisons, right? With men. By the way, I love you, speaking to that point about the trauma Olympics. Thank you for voicing that. We're all on our own journey, right?
We can't completely.
So now you're doing some work in some prisons, right? That if we go back to that idea, some men who have got some bigger challenges, potentially some tough shit that they're facing. Can you talk us through, that work? And is that you guys going in as the organization of She Is Not Your Rehab?
Yep. Me, I usually go in by myself and run a barbering program where it's just, I treat it like a barber shop. Guys are just, I'm cutting here, I'm teaching men how to cut here, but then also having the art of conversation, asking questions, ask me whatever. Whenever I'm interviewed or I'm in a space of men, there's no question that's out of bounds for me. So you can ask whatever you want. And these men are intrigued because I don't come with a academic certificate saying I've got this and that. I come as myself, my own lived experience and my own tools and insights of how I got my ass out of that, of not ending up myself behind the wire, but I'm behind the wire because I'm here to help men like my father. And so then my wife jumps along and we run a group therapy session together, and we talk about so many things, relationships to intimacy to trauma, and it's always wrapped around empathy and whanaungatanga, which is, in Māori relationship, the simplest word to describe that would be relationship. Walking alongside these men and having these hard conversations. And I remember we're up in Rimutaka prison, and this is the violent offenders unit, and these are the guys who are, whom society would deem as the worst in society, men who have murdered, committed horrific crimes, 20 plus years. And we're sitting in this group of 40 men, and one guy was, everyone spoke, and I read this letter that I wrote to one of my boys, one of my clients, who was an ex-gang member, and it resonated with this one gang member who, you couldn't see his face because it was all tatted up. And, he stood up and said, he felt like the letter was, I wrote the letter to him. And so in that moment, I stood up and I stood in the middle of the circle, and I asked him to come stand with me. And he resisted, like, oh, no. But I gently invited him, please, brother, I want to come and I just want to see you. Come stand with me in the circle. And as soon as he stood up, all the, corrections and the wardens, like, grabbed your belts, they were ready. But he came and stood in the circle with me, and I said to him, I just want to see you. So I just asked him to gaze into my eyes. And, in gang culture, in the bro culture, to stare at someone means you want to one out, like you're challenging them. And I said, no, I just want to stare at you, bro. I want to see you. And he kept looking down and then looking up, looking down, looking up at me. And as we stood there, it felt like half an hour, but we were literally standing there for about 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And as I stared at him,
if you've never done that, it's a long time.
It's a long time. And then, you just see tears coming down both eyes. And so, I just grabbed him and hongied him for an extra minute. And then we just hugged. And
Can you just describe really briefly the hongi?
So the hongi is when you just put your nose to someone else's nose. That's our indigenous way of connecting with someone else's wairua, their spirit. And so we did that, hugged. And when I walked to my seat, all the wardens and the correction officers were all in tears. And, some of the gangsters, the hard men, were in tears. But the beautiful thing about that was his partner messaged us that night on Facebook saying that she had just gotten off the phone to him. And she said, my man is a beautiful man. He's a hard man. But that one encounter with you, it's changed his life. Today, he's saying that this is the first day of his healing journey. And I didn't say anything. All I did was ask him to come stand with me, and I just wanted to see him. And I wanted to acknowledge him because he said that he resonated with the letter. And in this letter, I said this, I wrote this letter to my client who had grown up in the system, was abused by different foster parents, horrific abuse, which is why he ended up in the gangs. He wanted to hurt society. And this letter obviously resonated with him. So all I did was I just stared at him. And that's all it was. It was empathy shown physically, which changed his life, which was just transformative. And so, we've heard word from that brother. He's doing amazing. He's brought a sentence down because he's doing all the work, and all the psychologists and the psychiatrists, the psychologists and the therapists inside are all just like amazed. They said, you guys need to bloody do this, roll this throughout all of prisons, and which is what we're working towards. So that's why we've written this book, and we worked hard getting it funded to finding the funds to so we can roll it out into all prisons, because obviously I can't. Our ultimate dream is to roll it out into prisons throughout the world, which a lot of countries have messaged us wanting this book in their prisons. But we want to start with our backyard first. And so every male in prison in Aotearoa will get a book. And we've also worked hard on an audio book, because a lot of men are, don't read, or dyslexic, or literate. And so we're rolling that into prisons as well. Because we just want this, we want it to be accessible. We want our men to heal, because at the end of the day, our children are outside waiting for their Superman to come out better and more present, and wanting to be better fathers or their partners. Like, our society, deserves that, because the way we've been doing it ain't working. We're building more and more prisons.
Yeah. If that isn't a sign, then what is, and not even necessarily just looking at prisons, right, as one end of that spectrum, but like all of the other costs that we see of men who are, and I've heard you use this term before, transmitting their shit onto others versus kind of transforming it within themselves.
Definitely.
So where I want to kind of go to before we end this, Matt, is like I'm sensing this community that you have in your world as a barber. My father's barber, and with She Is Not Your Rehab, and the importance of it. I certainly see that myself. And so I want to kind of ask you, like you spoke earlier about when you were younger being at church, and your mother having these, like black eyes and stuff, and no one really said anything. And that's a community. Now I don't have that that church experience that you had. I grew up in the Catholic Church in different communities and so on. But how do you see then, like, if this is a church community and no one says anything, so what do you see, like as the role, I suppose, of community when it comes to actually supporting people who are hurting? Because that's a hard thing potentially to see that and go, I'm going to approach that and meddle in their business. But I can see there's a woman and children who possibly need help, and if they haven't caught onto it, perhaps they have now, fast from this conversation, a man who needs help too. So how can communities start to, be a part of this solution?
Well, I think it's recognizing that all children are our children. That's the mindset that me and my wife have. It takes a village to raise a child, and you ignoring, you not speaking up, you not challenging is dehumanizing, because it will become your issue. The more we allow that to happen, I mean, what we said, violence begets violence, shame begets shame. That kid can grow up becoming another perpetrator, someone who perpetuates violence. That could then happen to your own child. Your child may be friends with that person in school, end up dating that person, because it takes society. We believe in collective healing, community healing. And so we need to be courageous and be brave to speak up when you see this stuff. And it's not so much minding your own business or getting into someone else's business. It's being empathetic, showing empathy. Okay, I see this woman with a black eye. I'm going to go and see if she's all right. What can I do? And she may not want to do anything because she may want to protect her partner or what's happened to her. He doesn't like the shame. But still being empathetic and offering yourself that you're available if she ever wants to reach out.
Yeah, providing that option of safety, or at least
you're not saying anything, it's not providing anything.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and that's one of the hard things, right? We tend to, it would appear, live in a world that becomes a bit more individualistic day after day, right? And divided, and us versus them and all that kind of stuff. And I think, I keep coming back to this myself in my own work. Like, community is the answer, right? Yeah. And it looks different in many different forms, even what you're talking about with the work in the prison. I mean, it's providing a different kind of community, or the opportunity for it. I just absolutely love it. Matt, I'm loving this. I mean, man, I could keep talking about all this stuff forever. So she is not your rehab. Can you tell us, you've obviously written the book. We'll put all the links and all that kind of stuff, but in regards to that and what you guys are doing, what can you share? What do you want to leave us with the work that you guys are doing?
Look, I don't believe in a one-size-fits-all approach to anything, to healing and all that. And this is not a recipe of, unicorns and rainbows and let's heal like that, but sing kumbaya. This is hard conversations that we need to have in society, and we need to start making normal. And so I'm a big believer, when you own your story, you then have the power to transform it. But we need to own our stories first, and owning your story starts with feeling it so you know what to heal. And so the book, this puku puku that we've written, this taonga, this gift, it's my story and many conversations I've had with men over the last decade in my barber chair and my experiences. Take what you can from it. All of it may not be for you, but some of it may be. Take what you can and what works for you. But I hope it's a different window for anyone that reads this book. It's taken 2 years to write. It was hard. It caused a lot of tears, a lot of pain, a lot of heartache. But again, I'm a believer, who am I to do this work if I can't do this myself? And, me being vulnerable, I hope gives other men permission to be vulnerable themselves, because there's no shame in that. And it's for me, it's a roadmap. It's a love letter to my wife, because we want to showcase healthy relationships. What it actually looks like. How do you know what a healthy relationship is if you've never witnessed one or experienced it? And so that's what we wanted the book to be. One person said, "Oh, like your story with your wife almost sounds like too good to be true, like it's unattainable." And I'm like, that's because we've so lived in this society where we've been so groomed that this toxic and unhealthy relationships that men control the finances, or women are bossy, like all that stuff. That mindset needs to go, and we want to change that narrative. And we have changed that narrative with ourselves in our relationship, and we so believe it's possible. Me and my wife, we believe planting all these seeds, we may never get to see the fruit or eat the fruit from from this, but we hope and believe that our children's children will. They will live in a place where it is violence free. It's a big dream, but it's one that I put my life on the line for.
Yeah, I love it. Right, it's the idea of being a good ancestor, planting seeds for trees under which the shade you will never sit.
Yes,
I love it. Thank you, Matt, and I appreciate it. And I really want to honor you and the work that you and your wife and your whānau and everyone in the collective are doing. It's beautiful. It's admirable. I take a lot of inspiration from it myself.
Thank you, bro.
And I'm a huge supporter of it. And as an aside, from my own point, not for the listeners, but if there's any way I can continue to help your journey and what you guys are doing, I would absolutely love to, because man, this stuff is needed. And again, like, not just for those men who find themselves behind the wire, as you said, but everywhere. Because we can be better, and that starts by looking at what's in the way of that. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me, bro. Appreciate it, Mikey.
Cheers, brother.
Amen.
You've been listening to the Everyday Legends podcast, the show dedicated to helping everyday men build legendary relationships with yourself, with your partners, and in your world. If you have got something from this podcast, please share it with someone that you think could benefit from it. And please visit your home for podcasts. Like us, subscribe to us, leave us a review. Your feedback is phenomenal in getting this in front of more eyes and ears. Until next time, I'm Mike Campbell, and remember to build that legendary integrity.